You need to assign a special public defender because we have a conflict.
The public defender, Ann Taylor, is still on Bryan Kohberger's case. She has not recused herself.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Xana's mother's former attorney is still defending Kohberger. She still hasn't recused herself. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about why Ann Taylor is still defending Bryan Kohberger. I think the simple reason is because Kohberger wants her as his attorney. The more complicated reason is, even if Taylor isn't ideal, she is death penalty certified. This is an unusual case. There are not many of these cases, and Idaho is quite a small state, and there aren't many death certified public defenders in Idaho. In fact, if you really want to know, in the entire state of Idaho, there are just 13, right, death certified public defenders, and that's death penalty certified. In the north of Idaho, there's just one approved by the state to lead a capital punishment case, and that is the defender defending Kohberger. Now, I don't like quoting FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer in terms of the legal context, because she's not a lawyer. She's in law enforcement, and there is a difference. But I am going to quote her because she's one of the few people who has spoken about this. And she said, there's something this is something in 28 years in federal law enforcement I've never seen. And then she talks about when a public defender has a conflict, they don't accept the next case, etc. Well, whether or not Coffindaffer has seen it before, we're seeing it now. And I think it speaks to another aspect that has been underappreciated in this case. Have you heard of the saying, beggars can't be choosers? And I think that applies to some extent to Bryan, but I think it also applies to the sort of legal mechanism, the sort of whole justice framework. They don't have the option, really, in getting a more ideal situation, right? And so, obviously, it's not ideal. The situation that we have here is not ideal. Legally, it's not expedient. But Kohberger simply can't afford private counsel. You can't kind of get away from that. The other thing is, if he's defending if he's defended other family members, if she has defended other family members, I don't know whether that is a conflict in the sense of it's not a family member of hers. She was just doing her job, doing her defense. And so although there is a conflict, I don't know whether it's as serious as everyone's making it out to be. I mean, even the prosecutor, I don't know if he's sort of lodged any official statement saying we object to a conflict of interest. And that to me is the bottom line. If the chief prosecutor, the district attorney, is unhappy about that, then you can imagine that would be a problem. But who is actually complaining about it? Well, it seems to be Xana's mother, and it seems to be the media, and it seems to be social media. Kohberger seems to be okay with it, and the DA hasn't seemed to have complained about it either. And neither has Kohberger. And so I think as soon as the district attorney feels that there's a conflict of interest, then there is officially a conflict of interest in terms of the legal narrative that's playing out. But thus far, it's a theoretical conflict of interest. The other side is if you say, look, this is totally unacceptable. We cannot have Ann Taylor representing Kohberger, right? Well, Kohberger can't afford private counsel, right? And Kohberger can't be given just any other public defender because this is a death certified case. So you kind of have both those roads cut off, right? And so that's a bind. And due to the special circumstances of this case, it's an extremely serious crime. And there's only one person in northern Idaho qualified, and that's the person who's representing him. So that's another bind. And I suppose you could argue, I don't know if I would accept the argument, but I suppose you could argue her dropping Xana's mother as a client means there is no no ongoing, actual, present conflict of interest. But I think to be practical, you can sort of keep coming back to it, and you can say, well, there is a conflict of interest. Well, what are you going to do about it? It's not a ideal situation, but the less ideal situation is putting someone who's not certified. And I suppose you could say, let's just put this case on the back burner until a death-certified public defender becomes available, and then ask yourself, would you prefer that? If you were Bryan, would you prefer that? If you were would you prefer that? Would you prefer that this case is perhaps heard in December or June, July next year, right? In other words, we do it the right way, but we'll just wait another year or two. And you might say, I don't mind, I'll wait as long as it takes. But there might be someone who might mind. The University of Idaho might mind about that. The University of Idaho probably want to get this case sorted out. The students probably want to get the media out of their hairs so that they can get back to their thing. And then it's also possible that other forces are at work, and I'll talk to you about those in a second. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you have subscribed, welcome to the channel. I'll also be doing a very interesting, unusual teaser episode dealing with some different subject matter. Bear in mind, I'm the author of over 100 books. And as a storyteller, which stories inspire me? And so I'm going to be having a really interesting conversation on that topic. And so I'll be putting up a video that is a teaser to that whole discussion. So look out for that. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So I wouldn't be surprised if the legal system right now, not only in Idaho, but generally, is unusually backed up due to the pandemic, which means legal resources are stretched thinner than they usually are, right? So it's unusually backed up. There are fewer lawyers, public defenders than usual, right? When the pandemic happened, you didn't have crime, didn't sort of take a break as well. You didn't have crime coming under sort of lockdown. If anything, there was more crime, especially domestic cases, right? And so legal resources are stretched thinner than they usually are. Besides that, I don't think the Kootenai County can afford to simply sit tight and wait for another public defender to become available. So, if you say, you know what, we cannot have the situation, I do think it's beggars can't be choosers, not only from Bryan's perspective, but also from the larger legal fabric perspective. It's not a very good situation, and so beggars can't be choosers, right? There's at least one additional death penalty certified public defender who won't be available anytime soon this year, and that's Laurie Vallow's lawyer, Jim Archibald, right? He's also in Idaho, because the Vallow case heads to trial just 2 months from now on April 3rd. So as you can imagine, the University of Idaho, which is essentially the heart of Moscow, right? It's quite unusual, this case, is that it's being heard in the town of Moscow, which is quite a small town, and this town is basically exists because of the university, and the crime that has happened has been an attack, an assault on really the university. It's an attack by a student from a different university onto students of another university. And you could even imagine that the university, Washington State University, also want this case dealt with lickety-split, right? They want it dealt with very, very soon because of just the feelings of the students, and do I want to sign up and come to this university with all of this hanging in the air, right? And the answer is no. You want to have a good university experience, not all of this darkness and shadow hanging over it, right? So it's just bad PR all the way. And so I think there's also a final factor which may also be in play, and that is that Kohberger may want to avoid trial entirely by taking a plea deal. And that plea deal might involve allowing him to avoid the death penalty. That's also quite unique to his case. And it also may be why his defense are acting the way they are. Right now, Kohberger's defense hasn't really submitted anything in defense of his case. Banfield quoted a extract from a motion saying there are no books, papers, documents, photographs, or copies, or portions thereof that the defendant has that's going to be submitted at the time of trial. Nothing. We've got no information that's I'm using for my defense. And then the other one is there are no results or reports or physical or mental examinations or scientific tests that are going to be submitted at the time of trial. We know in the Chris Watts case that his defense didn't seem to be doing anything either, and we saw how the legalities were stitched up in that case. I wouldn't be surprised if the powers that be, knowing Kohberger, knowing he was bullied, knowing he's kind of a sensitive kid, are offering him the carrot. They're offering him a deal of guaranteeing him incarceration outside of general population as part of the deal. And he's really just got to evaluate what is the strength of the case, what are his chances of losing given the information they've got on him, and then where's that going to leave him ultimately. So I'm not going to take it further than that, but I do want to respond to reports I've heard on Banfield about Ethan being found in a doorway and that sort of thing. If any of this is true, it means the cops are leaking information. According to the affidavit, the first person law enforcement saw when they entered the house, do you know what the answer is to that? According to the probable cause affidavit, who was the first person law enforcement saw when they entered the house? The first victim. Well, they approached Xana's room. Who do you think the first victim was that they saw? It wasn't Ethan, it was Xana. It's there in plain English. So I'm not sure if there's a problem that people can't read plain English or can't write plain English. I don't know. But reading from the affidavit, I entered the King Road residence through the bottom floor door on the north side of the building. I then walked upstairs to the second floor. Officer Smith directed me down the hallway to the west bedroom on the second floor. I later learned that this was Xana Kernodle's room. Just before this room, there was a bathroom door on the south wall of the hallway. As I approached the room, right, he wasn't even inside the room. As I approached the room, I could see a body, later identified as Kernodle's, laying on the floor. Kernodle was deceased with wounds which appeared to have been caused by an edged weapon. So he sees Xana before he sees Ethan. Now, my understanding is that Ethan was behind the door, and if the first officers on scene first saw Xana, then doesn't it mean Ethan was literally behind the door? So then why all of this talk about doorway and hallway and all that kind of thing? Anyway, 15 hours ago, News Nation put up a video saying that Xana was killed last and fought back, and arguably fought back the most. Again, I don't know why this is news more than 2.5 months later. I thought that was obvious from day one. I thought it was obvious that Kaylee and Maddie were the primary victims and were pursued and attacked first, right? And that obviously then Ethan and Xana were the last victims. I believe that right in the beginning, and I believed that ever since. And there were some people who didn't believe that. But it does seem clear, of all the victims who could have fought back the most, Xana makes the most sense, knowing what we know now. She was awake. She seemed to have been the last person to go to sleep. I mean, I think she was even apparently on Snapchat, or she was on TikTok at 4:12, somewhere around there. Also, she would have witnessed her boyfriend failing to stand up to the attacker, or trying to stand up to him and failing. And by being attacked last, by being the fourth person that the suspect dealt with, all the noises and scuffles would have rendered the last victim, it doesn't matter who the victim was, the last victim would have been the most alert and awake anyway, right? And that's besides the fact that she was most likely the most alert and awake of all the victims to begin with. So I think saying something like Xana fought back is non-news. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if all 4 victims fought back in some way. Did Xana fight back more than any of the other victims? It's quite possible. Did she fight back more than Kaylee did? It's hard to say. More than Maddie did? It's hard to say. But it's likely, given that there was even sounds heard and recorded by the Ring camera 50 feet away. So I suppose the question we've got to ask is, what do you think Kohberger's resolve might be? You know, is he determined to go to trial? Is he determined to defend himself? If you think about Bad Teachergate and how he responded to that, how does he feel about being exposed in a public space, being criticized in a public space, being humiliated in the public eye? And there's one side of him that wants to prove how clever he is, but there's, I think, also another side of him that is kind of shy and sort of weak. And if he figures out that he really doesn't have a case, or that the law enforcement have a ironclad case against him, well, then it would be folly to go to trial. And so right now I think Kohberger is being tempted with this idea of you can avoid all that pain and suffering. You can make your life easier, right? It's almost like being offered heroin. You could, right now, you can make all of this trouble go away. Just take this plea deal, right? And he resists that for an hour, and then a day, and another day goes past, and then another week. And do you think he's going to eventually give in to that idea by June? Time will tell. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.